We will go and get started, and then we'll just kind of let people in as we go. So I think my goal today is I'm going to give a really quick introduction of who I am and what we do here at Reviewer. I think it kind of helps set the stage for kind of how we got to this point and kind of today's conversation and discussion points. So kind of my quick introduction, and then again, we'll come back to today's kind of agenda and goals. And being that it is a bit potentially smaller crowd of people who are actually going to make it, I want to make this as engaging kind of community impacted as possible. So if people have questions or comments, or if you want to kind of guide the conversation, please do leverage the chat function. I'm going to go ahead and keep an eye out for chatting, and then obviously we'll incorporate many of those concepts as we go, or we'll save them for the end for a Q&A. But that's kind of the benefits of having a bit smaller of a crowd on these types of calls. So I'm going to give my quick introduction. Again, it'll make a lot of sense and come full circle of kind of why we're having this conversation. As you can kind of see down here, one of the logos we work with is the U.S. Chambers Foundation, who's using Reviewer for the 6B. And so many of you actually may be indirectly using our platform with that type of campaign as well. On top of that, we work with probably another dozen or two actual chambers, either statewide or at a local level. On top of that, we do thousands and thousands of these what I call like membership-based award programs, scholarships, leadership programs, grants, etc. And so our background, so my name is Kyle, I'm the CEO here at Reviewer. We started the company back in about 2012, and we did so from our own firsthand experience. So for many of you guys, who might be doing, local member recognition awards or leadership programs, we were the ones who dealt with the paper processes. So again, 10 years ago, if you think through like what a very common nomination packet or program would look like, we would have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of binders being mailed to our doorstep. We were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and scores and meeting with other committee members, and it was quite painstaking to say the least. Over time, though, is when we kind of started to see this online transition. And what that really meant was, tying your web development teams, using your websites, built-in web forms, a lot of downloading of documents, a lot of emails, a lot of spreadsheets, even more spreadsheets, and even more spreadsheets. That list goes on. And so for us as a volunteer, we actually preferred the paper-based processes. They were at least kind of centralized in a kind of a dedicated hub. Once we started to use all these kind of quote unquote technologies and tools, it actually allowed us then to start using other tools to run the campaigns, right? And so none of those platforms were intended for the task at hand. And so we saw a couple of really terrible things start happening. So for many of you might be in small, close-knit communities, much like I am, and we knew who the applicants were a lot of times. And so other review committee members, and even us included, would let personal biases or who we knew maybe impact the results, which absolutely can't happen. We also started to see firsthand these programs where applications would come in through email, they downloaded, they get exported, and either information might get lost, or even worse, things would go to spam filters. So there was one particular use case. It was actually an organization offering a scholarship to their local community. They cut checks and awarded funds, and then months later, they found out that not even all of the applicants got included in the selection because they're part of a spam filter. So obviously, it's a very bad look on everybody involved, and at that point in time, compliance is becoming a real issue. So over the last 10 years, again, we work with thousands and thousands of organizations doing these different types of programs. And this is actually a continuation from last month's webinar that we hosted for Chambers, which was kind of mimicking the Austin Chambers A-List Awards. We're trying to showcase one of the organizations that is using Reviewer in a really impactful way. And one of the questions that kept popping up over and over and over again is, how do we kind of modernize our program? We want to be more modern. As we approach the new year, what type of technologies and tools can put us at the forefront? Again, how can we be more modern? And that term came up so many times that we decided to run a webinar that kind of is structuring these programs that leverages kind of the cutting edge emerging trends of running these programs that, again, kind of do two things. One is it helps kind of set the precedent as a chamber that, we're doing things the right way. If we're going to be offering these programs, we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way, we're compliant, we're providing the greatest experience as possible. But then also kind of from our team's perspective, how do we leverage our deep background working with other types of membership-based associations who have been doing these programs for a very, very long time that actually bleed really well into your industry? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk you through, I think, a really well-structured award program, but all of these concepts and these components are going to be totally relatable to leadership applications, board nominations, scholarships, grants. Many of the chambers that we work with will use us for 4 or 5 completely different use cases, conferences, things like that. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind, but very specifically, we're going to look at the National Association of Realtors, who does a 30 under 30 award, which recognizes, as you can imagine, real estate individuals under the age of 30. And I think it's a really good topic because I talk about creating a modern award program. I think that really does set the precedent of a challenge that many of you might be facing. And that's an aging demographic membership. And I know it's maybe a polarizing word to use, and it's a challenging topic, but membership-based associations in general are relying on the sustainability of their membership. And so over time, we're starting to run into this challenge where, the future of our membership, right, are not joining. They're not feeling the sense of accomplishment. They're struggling to find the engagement. And so what better type of award program can we offer, especially as a chamber, is to identify and recognize either young upcoming companies or individuals within your local community. So again, you might already be doing a wide variety of awards. That's absolutely great. All the concepts that we're going to talk about are going to apply to you as well. But I just kind of want to set that stage that kind of comment that I made is a challenge that many of us are looking to solve. And so if you're not running awards, or if you want to add a new award category, I don't think there's a better kind of category or award structure that we can offer than that. So we're going to use that as today's example. I also want to kind of set the stage as well as we go is, we talk about modernizing our application structures or kind of creating these modern experiences, and our minds instantly go to the submission side of things, right? Like how do we kind of make this process modern for our membership? And that's a total right way to do it. With that said, I think there's three obviously very different demographics that go into these programs. You have your submitters or your applicants. I can broadly say maybe our communities. You have you and your staff, right? From an operation perspective, who doesn't want more efficiencies? But then I think the often overlooked demographic is going to be review committees and your volunteers. Again, going back to where our company started from, that's why we call it reviewer, is that was the life that we lived. And so we have to kind of think through all three different parties and try to think through, again, how do we elevate their experience as well? And experience is a common term that I like to use because we very much need to think through these things in that matter. Can you absolutely throw up a web form on your website? You bet. Can you use spreadsheets and download documents and send your review committees to Google Drive? Yeah, you bet. But is that the experience that we really kind of want to stand behind? Again, thinking through a lot of the many negative ramifications that come along with that. So with that said, the first thing I want to look at, and we are going to bounce around here a little bit. I will have kind of some text on the back of my screen, but my goal today is I want to make this as visual as possible. So yes, we are going to look at reviewer, but the goal here today isn't to showcase all the features that we have. It's more so like taking these concepts and how we can actually visualize them. And of course, I need to do that in reviewer. But the first thing I want to look at is like, how do you structure an award submission workflow? And at its core, this is probably the most critical component that we're going to get into today as far as how do you modernize this, because we are trying to either push towards it and are seeing a pretty big trend or shift within the industry. And that's breaking your nomination process into two completely independent components, a nominator perspective and then a nominee perspective. So let me explain. So the reason why we want to kind of go this route is, first and foremost, we have to get the word out there. We have to market these programs. At its core, they are part of your marketing initiatives. I would imagine many of you on today's call are going to be either marketers or part of your education teams. And so the idea behind this then is to open a call for nominations. And the complete goal behind this should be first and foremost, awareness and giving names. So what do I mean by that? I mean, we want to ask our nominators to submit, who are you nominating, who are you, and why? That's it. No more, no less. We will not be taking their content and using it for the review and selection. Now, I know this is a big, giant shift in how these programs have been ran in the past. Generally speaking, when you do an open call for nominations, you're asking the nominator to tell us all these great stories and tell us all the stuff about the nominee. We keep it private. We take that information, we go through review, we go through selection, and then we have this giant gala, and then we announce recipients. And in theory, that's great. The challenge, though, is two-part. Number one is that the nominator doesn't have all the facts about the nominee. So quite frankly, they're going to be going to them probably anyways, letting them know that they nominated them and trying to get some assistance, right? Number two, I guess there's three things. Number two is we are always looking for ways to engage with our membership, right? Who doesn't want a more one-to-one communication and touch points? And I'll kind of get into that here in just a second. And then the third component to this, and this is an example I always give, so if my wife ever listens to this, I do apologize. I love my wife to death, but if I was to nominate her for an award, my nomination would not be even remotely close to as good as if she was to nominate me. And I don't think it's because she loves me more. What I think happens is that she's just a much, much better writer. So with that kind of thought process, does that make me or her a worse nominee? Probably not. It's more of a reflection on the ability and the effort and the time being put forth by the nominator. So with all that said, I think the ideal structure, we're going to look at this right now, is you break this process into two completely independent components. You have an open call for nominations. Who are you? Who are you nominating and why? From there, we kind of think about this as like an Oscar award or an Emmy award if you guys watch those type of things. And the nominee will get notified and they quote unquote accept their award nomination. Now, what that does is it kind of bridges the gap and creates an ecosystem for you to have one-to-one communication with them. They join the nomination. Maybe you want them to see what was said about them. Maybe you want to keep it anonymous and private. That's totally up to you. Maybe you want them to see what was said about them and then update it to be more accurate, or even add on additional notes on top of it. Or maybe you want them to fill out a completely new form where you put the emphasis of the work on them. So resumes, short answers, essays, addresses, current job, all these things that have to be accurate. It also puts the bulk of the effort on them. So when you go to do a review and selection process, you're kind of taking out, the comparison of apples to apples. Somebody who might put forth more effort than others, that's okay because it's coming directly from the nominee. So with all that said, what does this look like? And again, for those of you doing scholarships, leadership programs, etc., this applies to you identically. The only difference is that you won't have a dual process nominator nominee. The nominee for your types of programs is just the applicant coming in and registering and applying. So I use the term registering. That's kind of where everything starts. So again, this is the National Association of Realtors 30 Under 30 Awards. I think if I'm a Chamber of Commerce, I'm ripping this off 100%. I'm honoring local members, right, or non-members. I'm using this as a conversion opportunity to get them to join the chamber as a member or part of our Young Professional Network. I think it's a great program. And I'm using your website, right? So again, if I was to show you how, the Grand Rapids Chamber or the Austin Chamber uses Reviewer, it goes through their website. So another example, Grand Rapids Chamber uses for their Athena Awards and honors local women in business in their local community, but it all goes through their website. So branding, look and feel, it all stays very, very cohesive. From there, they put a link that says click here to nominate or click here to apply. And that's what transitions them from their web presence to Reviewer. Now, I kind of modified this. I mentioned beforehand we have to lower the barrier. By no means would I have your nominators create any type of account, right? They would just jump right into who you are, who you're nominating, and why. The nominees, however, or if it's a self-application based program, leadership programs, conferences, scholarships, you name it, they would be the ones that create their profile. This is a core component, though, to a modern program, not just Reviewer, because if you think through all the moving parts to these campaigns, you have people, you have submission forms, and I say forms plural because what happens if you select somebody for the award? Do you want them to submit a bio, or do you want them to submit some type of like headshot or a video that you can use for marketing collateral? In the nomination process, are you going to do letters of reference? Are you going to be collecting things like resumes? There's obviously some type of review, judging, scoring, selection process. There might be communication that's going on, and what you can't have happening, like it's absolutely impossible to run a modern program or even an engaging program where all those elements live in different places, right? Like at its core, these programs have to be centralized into a main kind of administrative hub. And so to accomplish that, we use a concept called profiles. So in this example, obviously the nominator wouldn't create one, but the nominee would. So nominator comes in, and again, you need to think through like what data do you need from both parties that empowers your staff and your team to make the most informed, fair selection as possible. And that's it, right? Don't collect more, don't collect less. There's overarching, a lot of organizations try to overthink these campaigns and they start to collect way too much information. So you have to think through like, what is the type of award? So for example, like with the Austin A-List, it's honoring and really recognizing local startup companies, trying to attract them to the city of Austin, Texas, attain and retain talent. And so for them, all the questions pertain to you as a company, right? Like what value are you providing? How do you impact our local communities? Tell us more about your leadership team. If it's the Athena Awards, right? I talked about how it's recognizing women in business. So it's tell us more about your personal achievements, your resumes. In this example, it's a 30 under 30. So it wants to know more about your personal achievements up until this point. So obviously, if it's a real estate based program, it's asking about like, how many homes did you sell, right? Things like that. So the actual submission structure is going to be unique to you and your organization. Obviously scholarships and grants and leadership programs are a whole nother beast, but you kind of have to think like, how do you want to structure your submission experience? It seems like small things, right? But I can't imagine here as we approach 2025, our audience wants to go and submit this to you through email. They don't want to be downloading documents. They don't want to be using like Adobe PDF Builder, saving and exporting, trying to share it back to you. They want to use a dedicated hub. There is an option to save. They can log out. They can come back later. I'm going to come back to that. Again, this is who I'm nominating. Here's kind of why I'm nominating them. And then in this example, it actually does in real time trigger an email notification. So it's a, dear Kyle, you've been asked, you've been nominated for this year's, 30 under 30. Click here to accept your nomination and begin your application. So at this point in time, I've already now started that whole one-to-one engagement and communication with my nominees. They then join the profile. It tells a bit more about, dates and deadlines. It tells them what category that they were nominated for, if you have a multi kind of category program, and then it gets into the application itself. Now, again, this seems like very, very small things, but you are going to have potential eligibility criteria with all of your programming. Let's not waste people's time if they're not eligible, right, for your program. Like, that's a bad look. It's not very engaging. Similar, right, you guys only have so many hours in a day. I'm going to make up a number. If you have 100 nominations and 40 of them aren't eligible, you just wasted your time reviewing 40 people. So let's start to leverage what I call like a personalized experience, right? Where the system will ask them a series of questions. In this case, if you're not 30 years old, then you're told, unfortunately, you're not able to proceed forward. If you are qualified, then you can kind of advance to the bulk of the application. So again, it seems like small things, but these incremental improvements and these kind of small items really do compound over time. And that's what makes these programs extremely efficient and extremely engaging. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of the form. Again, this is a hyper-specific application form asking about, this person's real estate information. It does have file uploads. I'm going to come back to this because, again, we talk about like having a modern experience. It's all about accessibility. So I'd hate to see you have any type of online platform that, addresses part of the program, but then requires you to download and export and go use a bunch of other tools and to come back later. So at least within Reviewer, I'm going to show this to you. Every file upload gets embedded. If you are going to consider maybe doing like a video-based submission, which is incredible from a marketing perspective, you actually can physically watch the videos, look at the photos, read the resumes, all in Reviewer side by side with your note-taking tools. So it does elevate the experience for everybody. Again, this has a significant number of short answers, so you can have people writing things in there. I'm based out of Lincoln, Nebraska, so if we ever lose power from thunderstorms, I don't have to worry about my applicants losing the information and then pretty much rebelling and not coming back and finishing it. It will auto-save as they go, things like that. There's also a component here that I do want to look at called references. I'm not going to ask in the chat if you guys are doing references, which is another kind of these campaigns. It doesn't get much more modern than this. This is at the cutting edge of how to run these programs. If you are also offering leadership programs or scholarships, 90% of you will be asking for references. So the way that this works, again, the idea is we have these kind of applicant profiles, is that we'll ask for the name and email of the person writing the reference. What's going to happen is it'll actually send them an email saying, hey, Dwight, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle. Click here to do so. Now, this is that kind of total shift in how programs have ran in the past, is instead of asking your reference to sit down at the very last minute and write a full-blown letter from scratch, instead, why don't we ask them to answer a series of questions? Again, going back to like the nominator nominee process, oftentimes reference letters are a better reflection of the writing capabilities of the reference and less so who they're writing it about. They're also oftentimes just going to regurgitate or repurpose a whole reference they wrote for somebody else. So in this example, we really are lowering the barrier for the reference themselves. We're asking them to answer a series of questions. You can have them rank the applicants. You can have them answer like 3 short answers. But the reference comes in here. They just answer the questions as they appear. And then when you go to do a review, every single applicant is basically comparing apples to apples because the data associated with them is very, very consistent. So again, it does not get more kind of engaging or modern than that. Now, as you can see, there's a giant headshot here, but it does show kind of the power of the platform. You can collect multimedia, you can collect videos. I do want to preface this by saying from a best practice perspective, if you do want to gather additional data from the nominees, or if you're doing a leadership program or a scholarship, You may not want to collect this information from everybody on the front end. That's totally fine. Many of our clients will actually run through like entire review selection processes, and then only the finalists or only the top 30 or whatever that number looks like, they then rejoin their profiles and then they add those file uploads later on. So again, it's all about lowering the barrier, only collecting the data that you need for the task at hand, and then of course expanding on that and collecting more information when it becomes relevant. Again, without this type of infrastructure, that doesn't become possible. So kind of moving on, everything that we just looked at here was from an applicant perspective, right? So it's lowering the barrier, creating a very user-friendly, low expectation submission experience for the applicants, nominator, nominee, whatever we want to call them. We talked about the references. The next thing that I want to look at is going to be more operationally speaking, all right? So internally, how do we help you guys not play around with spreadsheets, no more emails, no more document downloading, stay hyper efficient? But then also at the same time, how do we create this ecosystem where when you go to do a review and selection process, you're being equally, if not more sensitive to those efficiencies for your volunteers? And then also, and again, the kind of core behind today is create this kind of fair, non-biased review and selection process. Because at the end of the day, you can have the most beautiful website, the most impactful scholarship or grant or award application form. You can be so efficient, right? At the end of the day, if the review team sits down and they're not able to put forth kind of the effort or create a review structure that selects the best candidates, we've completely failed, right? And so again, when I use the term modern, those are the type of things I think through. Like, what does the perfect experience look like end to end? And so that's where we're going to kind of get into like creating review structures. How do you actually go through judging and selection processes? Maybe you want to tie in like a community voting aspect, things like that. So I'm going to kind of start there. We will preview some of the operational items here, but at the end of the day, you are collecting applications, right? It could be 10 of them, it could be 10,000 of them, it could be 100 of them. That's up to you. At some point in time, you need to take those applicants and then pair them up with a team for some type of review selection process. How do you do that? So some of the metrics that we have, and this might seem a bit surprising, is that most review committee members, especially if they're volunteers, really can't take on more than 15 nominations or 15 applications. After 15, their workload capacity and their energy levels drops off pretty significantly. So then the question comes up, well, how are we able to give the same effort to the first applicant to the 31st applicant, right? And so we have to kind of think through, like, how do you want to bifurcate out your submissions into what I call pods or buckets? That way each applicant's reviewed the proper number of times, right, to get a fair, accurate reflection of them as a candidate, but at the same time, not overwhelm your review committee. So we're basically creating these review buckets. On top of that, how do you also tie in a review and selection process? So I'm going to show you how I would address that. There are a million ways of doing this. Again, some of you might be running an award program that has like 10 different award categories. That makes it easy. That's kind of where we can kind of start. Some of you might have like different departments and different teams. You want to kind of split the workloads. We can do that. Some of you might be looking at randomization, with my personal favorite, because it does ensure kind of compliance in the sense that, we're not having people who might be biased reviewing one another, things like that. So jumping back here a little bit into reviewer, just to touch on this a little bit, I can't sit here and say, hey, how do you run a very modern program without showing you your command center? So operationally speaking, you will have a command center for every campaign that you launch within Reviewer. I'm a marketer, right? So I'm a huge data nut. So I love watching this dashboard because it shows me real time, like how many days are remaining until my deadline, how many entries have I received, where are they in the process? And what I mean by that, like literally from end to end. So I can look at how many days until my deadline, how many nominations I've received, how many nominations are in progress, how many people have been nominated but not started their nomination itself, how many of those accepted their nomination and started but haven't finished, and then how many of those accepted, started, and finished. And so because of that, we can actually have both personalized messaging being sent to them by your staff, or there are automated messages that can be sent in Reviewer. So for example, if your deadline to submit this nomination packet is XYZ date, you could literally set it up where you send a reminder message every 4 days up until that date itself. I mentioned the references, exact same concept. So for those of you doing leadership programs and scholarships, it'll show you in real time how many outstanding references have been requested. Are they done? Are they not done? And then reminder messages to those as well. So again, like we've thought through absolutely every component from the end-to-end life cycle of these campaigns. I've used the terminology profile quite a bit. So let's take a really quick peek at that before we look at those buckets I talked about. And so you will have the ability to basically look at menus, right? And so I think of like a menu as like a restaurant. I can sort and filter from breakfast, lunch to dinner, similar concept here. I can filter by categories. So my different awards, my different stages, right? And you basically get this list of all of your participants. Now from here, you can simply click on their name or ID, and it shows you all the content that we collected about them. So in this example, we've got Ryan. Ryan's my nominee, and it shows me all that data that I just looked at with you guys. I have images in here. I've got YouTube videos. I have a resume that was uploaded. I have all of Ryan's personal information, everything in real time and automatically got consolidated into one hub. Better yet, I can also communicate. So if I ever needed to one-to-one directly communicate with my nominees or my nominators, I can. I can leave them notes, communication, it sends notifications. It also allows me to internally leave notes about them. So it's very likely that you and your team or your committees want to collaborate. This allows you guys then to leave notes to one another that the nominees themselves would never actually see. On top of that, again, going to those attachments, this is a pretty minimal example. There's only 2 file uploads. You might be 20, 30 file uploads. The beauty of our platform, at least, again, is it consolidates everything. So again, it'll show you a list of every single file that we uploaded. And then when you press the view button, it actually shows you all the content that we collected about them, right? So this is a spreadsheet. It gets embedded right in Reviewer. So again, it seems like a small thing, but the goal is to both modernize these programs, but also create these highly engaging experiences. I don't want your review team having to use, so for example, if they're a Mac user and I send them a spreadsheet, they're going to struggle, right? They might be on their iPads, so they don't even have access to it. They're going to use or Apple's really terrible Pages software, right? And that's just not going to work. So in Reviewer, it treats it the same. It doesn't matter if they're on an iPad, a desktop, a PC, a Mac. Everything gets embedded right smack dab in front of them. It creates incredible accessibility. Going back to your references, it actually shows them a list of every reference that was submitted. They can open it up. It shows them the content of the reference, never leaving my page. I do want to kind of go back here because this is a core component to this process where I mentioned before that Ryan might have been nominated 6 different times. It actually could show us a line item for each of the 6 people that nominated Ryan. And then when you open it up, it'll actually show you what was said about them. So again, there's different workflows that can be created here. For your scholarships or for your leadership programs, it's very likely that you want Ryan, the applicant, at some point to come back and submit more stuff to you. So we also have an option over here to click Add New. And what that's going to do is when you click Add New, it's going to pop up and say, well, what do you want to add? And then Ryan, in this case, would actually fill it out right smack dab there, and then it gets attached automatically back to his profile. So back to the task at hand are those buckets. So again, this is a extremely powerful feature within Reviewer, but I think just overarching, this is how most programs should structure their campaigns. You need to take your submissions and you need to somehow, some way, shape, or form give them to your team for review. I don't care anymore what type of content you're collecting. If you have any personal information that's as simple as name, you physically cannot be downloading, exporting, and sending that off, right? We don't want that being transmitted through email. We can't have it live in spreadsheets. We can't have our teams or our review committees downloading things and storing it on their local hard drives, right? So number one is not only are we pairing up submissions with review teams, we're actually pairing them up with very sensitive data in a safe, compliant, safe manner. So the way I would structure this, so if you have multiple different award programs or categories, it's beautiful because what I would do is I would actually create one bucket per program. From there off to the right, you actually assign that bucket out to a dedicated team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into Reviewer, they just see the submissions in their award. Whenever Sally, Sue, and Steve come into Reviewer, they see the submissions in their bucket. Now, again, if you want your team to review, every submission, that's totally fine. You just give them access to all the buckets. For others on the call, maybe you want to create a multi-phase program. So submissions come in, it goes through a vetting process. You might have a dedicated team in charge of that. From there, it advances to a phase 2 review, which might be interviews or it might be a formal judging process. And then from there, it goes on to like your executive team or your board for a final say. Similar concept, right? You just create a bucket for each of those workflows and you fill up your bucket with the team. Why this works really well is it also allows you to open the buckets up and start to do some pretty cool things. So it shows you a list in real time of literally every applicant within that bucket, how many people are supposed to review that applicant, and then who those individuals are. So for many of our clients, they will leverage randomization. Again, this is my personal opinion. I think that's the right way to go. Is you could say, you know what, my team just doesn't have the capacity to look at more than 15 submissions. So I need to be mindful of both of that, but at the same time, I have to ensure that every applicant gets reviewed probably like 5 times. So you could actually bulk select things and then type in, give every applicant to 5 evaluators, or no more than 6, no less than 4. And then within reviewer, the system will equally and randomly distribute that number out. On top of that, if you ever have to recuse anybody or if somebody drops out, you can edit your staff and then pick and choose specifically who they're going to have access to. So finite control. So then that kind of brings us then to the last topic. Great. So we had this really great submission experience. Operationally, we're a well-oiled machine. I paired up my submissions with my review team. The next piece of the puzzle and the last piece of the puzzle is how do you actually conduct a review? So again, I think there's 2 core components here to be sensitive to the time. I'm just going to show this to you. Number one is the redaction of data. So if it's not relevant to the review, don't show it to the review team. So if they don't need to know your demographic details or your ethnicity, then hide it, right? If they don't need to know your name because you want it to be completely private, then don't show the name. So we have all the redaction tools in the platform. The second thing is there has to be some type of mathematic-based rubric. Now, I understand that with all of these campaigns that I just gave examples on, there might be some type of subjective deliberation process, right? The data does not tell the whole story. With that said, we need to have data to help make those informed decisions. So leverage some type of score sheet that aligns with your application form, it aligns with your mission, it aligns with your vision. Have your review team fill up the score sheet, get these leaderboards, which again need to be done automatically. You and your staff and the review committee cannot be manipulating data and numbers as good as we all think we are with spreadsheets. Like it's so easy to mess up a formula. But basically leverage those leaderboards to then have those kind of informed deliberation committee meetings. And then the third component to that is if you are going to leverage some type of like public voting or some type of showcase, how do you tie that in, not overweight the rest of the results, right? So maybe you want to weight public voting is either having its own dedicated fan favorite, maybe you want to weight it like 5% with actual formal judging as 95%. That's up to you. So what does that look like? So again, in review, we just paired up a bunch of applicants with review teams. It should say very, very consistent. So when the review team comes in, they too get a menu. So in this example, my evaluators are tasked with scoring these 6 people. Again, if you want to redact any information or make it private, you totally can. But the review team will simply click on the profile and they get this super simple to use split screen. So again, the idea is that you have to lower the barrier for the selection process. These are local business leaders, they're volunteers, they're part of your executive committees. You cannot be asking them to spend 10, 20, 30 hours on these campaigns. So they get this split screen. So half of their page is the applicant's nomination packet or components of it, right? Because you might be redacting data, etc. And then the right-hand side is your completely custom selection tool. So again, you can have them ranking them on a scale from 1 to 10, drop downs, checkboxes, thumbs up, thumbs down. You can do weighted scoring. But the idea is that your team will side by side read through the application form, fill out the score sheet. They can jump up to the file uploads. They can actually physically view a file side by side with their score sheet. They can move on to the note-taking tools. They can look at the references. They can look at the nominations. And again, the idea is that it just flows together, right? They answer a series of questions, and then once they're done, they will go ahead and submit this. Now, the beauty of it is they will then in real time move on to the next, but you and your teams can start to run these leaderboards. And it'll actually show you in real time a list of every single applicant that got reviewed. So these might be your nominees, it might be your applicants to your scholarship programs, your leadership academies, whatever it is. It will then show you who individually scored them, how they scored individually, collectively, total scores, as well as averages. So literally, we just kick out this really nice leaderboard that shows you, hey, Ryan's our highest rated applicant, where Gilligan's our lowest rated applicant. From here, you can start to either use this to make your selections. Many of our clients will then take like the top X number and then with one click, move them to round 2 review, final selection review, whatever it might be. Others will leverage this page for deliberation meetings. They might say, hey, we're going to give out 3 awards this year. With that said, 3rd and 4th place are very, very close. So let's, as a committee, talk about why we chose people the way that we did. And just because, the score sheets say one thing doesn't mean it has to live like that, right? So you can do whatever you want with it. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds today on some of these other components. We also have some pretty cool tools that helps to identify judging trends. So for me, the first thing I'm going to look at down here is Robert. Like Robert scored Gabrielle a 13. So then my question then would be like, okay, did Robert just score Gabrielle low because it was a poor quality application? Or what if Robert has like never scored higher than a 15? So by his own personal standards, he actually scored Gabrielle really, really well. However, in comparison to the other judges, she's absolutely being penalized. And in this case, if you're awarding the top three, that might impact the results. So we actually have a bunch of tools in place to help you A, identify that, and then B, also kind of normalize it, which I won't get into today. So then the last piece of the puzzle, if you want to do public voting or public showcase, how do you configure that? I am a huge proponent of both of those. And I want to preface that by saying take it with a grain of salt. Anytime you offer an option for public voting, it does open the door to fraud. It's not hard to spend $10 on Upwork or Fiverr and pay somebody to create a bunch of usernames and vote over and over and over again. Don't worry, Reviewer has the tools in place to kind of help A, somewhat prevent that, but also B, helps you identify if that's happening. But I think it's an incredible way to A, market the program, B, bring visibility to your membership, and then C, connect with the community as voters. Also, as a marketer, it's a really great tool to get potential leads. So what does that look like? In this specific example, we basically took the top 50 nominations and they go on this page. So if you don't do any public voting at all, that's totally fine. You can still do this. What we're doing is we're honoring and we're showcasing our membership, either everybody, the top 50, or maybe you only want to publicly recognize the award recipients on a per award category each year. So I could come here and say, okay, let's show me my award recipients of 2023, 2022, etc. But it creates these really cool public profiles. So it shows some type of thumbnail. It tells us who they are, maybe a brief abstract about why they were nominated or who they are. When I open it up, it actually pulls content from their submission form. So again, if you have a 50-page application form, which I totally hope you guys don't do, maybe you want like only 3 questions to show up here. So you can actually control what content appears on this page. But as you can see here, my community and my membership can go here. They can look at my award nominations or my recipients. If there are like image galleries, it could be photos, it could be videos. They can scroll through it. They can interact with it. They can learn more. Or in your case, if you want them to vote, you can see that there is a couple different types of voting options that we have. I would definitely preface having them give you your email address before they can cast a vote, so you can set some limitations. And then from a marketing perspective, how beautiful is that? That is kind of this giant list of voters, many of which may not be members, right? So that kind of goes into your team to kind of get them onto your newsletters and maybe recruit them to become members in the future. So with all that said, I am going to pause. I try to give myself usually 15, 20 minutes for a Q&A, so I'm right on time here. But I'm going to kind of go back